Hello, John. Thank you for coming back to the show.
Yes, it's a nice little hiatus, of about 3 weeks or so. It was good. It was kind of a lull for certain things, but not for others. So so
Just to just to remind the audience, in the description of this video and all the videos with John, the link to his website and a link to his X page. You can click them. Please sign up for the periodicals and maybe even a reading. We'll go over those. But I think it's really important to dive into this idea of the curse and the double tap. And we'll, with the shofar not being blown because of Rosh Hashanah for 2 consecutive years. And John has did some deeper research in this and how it coincides with major events.
yeah.
And you're coming out with an article soon here to explain that.
Yeah, I'm coming out with it's a Hogue prophecy report. It's 12 articles. It's over 50,000 words long. It's like a little book. And it goes very deep and detailed since the turn of the 19th century and the 20th century, watching the path and destiny of Zionism from its inception to it kind of reaching a climax of survival or not surviving in the next double tap, which, ladies and gentlemen, is only on this day 1 month and 5 days away in September. It begins, the shofar, just to give you people some background, is the ram's horns that are blown during at certain occasions, but most significantly in every day that the Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, the 2 day ceremony on its first day. At dusk, because all days are changed at dusk in the Jewish calendar after sundown. And when all the households across the world or across Israel, they all blow, or the synagogues blow the shofar as this whole symphony of horns blessing, hopefully wishing to bless a sweet outcome as with the food that's eaten at the Sabbath or at the beginning of, if it's not on the Sabbath. And what then happens is that Satan is silenced. Satan, who in Judaism, as I understand it, is the prosecutor of sins. He has his role to be the person that goes out and gathers the sinful and exposes the sinful. And so the hope is that more good luck will happen to all people, Jewish people, and by extension, because it influences these cycles, Gentiles as well, non-Jewish people, to have good luck and hope for good things to happen when these horns have been blown. But what on rare occasions happens, since the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, is that New Year's, which usually comes mostly in what the Judeo-Christian or Gregorian calendar that we use says is September, and sometimes in October, early October, as the moon's whims go per year. And so it will sometimes fall on a Friday, the Shabbat or Sabbath, and at that dusk point in the first day of the 2 days. And if it falls in that, that means it, because the Sabbath is about not working, it's about resting, reflecting, and being meditative. The day of rest, every 7 days, the Lord also took the Sabbath off. And so, after creating the world, and in the lore of Judeo-Christian scriptures, and so the Sabbath is so the horn cannot be blown on a Rosh Hashanah if it happens on the Sabbath on a Friday evening. And so what then may happen, some people think it's a superstition. Now that I've really looked at it so detailed. And indeed, not trying to find what I'm looking for, but to just look at what happens. And the thing I found is that if there's a silent horn, or the horns across the Judaic world cannot blow, then on Rosh Hashanah, then that means Satan is not stayed by blessings. Satan goes to work, revealing sins and things that are wrong and things that are needed to be atoned. And so what I have done is I have, in these 12 articles, I may even publish it as a book. It's big enough to be a book, um, and make them 12 chapters, is that the the I take the theme of Zionism, which had its birth at the end of the 19th century, and with Theodor Herzl and the Zionist movement to make a Jewish nation. Now, it's interesting because the original title for his efforts to do that basically called it, he was going to try to make it Greater Israel, Eretz Yisrael. And my Hebrew's not that good, but I know what that means. And it has, then it's interesting because later he changed the name to, for Jews to, I'm not getting the right name here, but it's for Jews to go to Palestine. Um, I also found out in this research that Palestine is a far more ancient name for what is called the Israeli state area, that it goes all the way back to a pre-Abrahamic pagan worshiping of a certain goddess who had a goat's head on her head, but she was this goddess, and her name was Pallas. And Palestine is basically land of Pallas. Now, it's interesting to note that when the events, which the shofar are actually siding with, the events that happened with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the rebellion against the Romans that ended up literally fulfilling Jesus Christ's famous prophecy as his disciples were walking with him out of the temple after he caused all the controversy and overturned the tables and the money lenders and all that. And when he left, he turned, and when they said, "What an edifice that is," and he said, basically he said, "I say unto you that not one stone will be left unturned and destroyed of this temple." And yet, this temple, meaning himself, will be resurrected in 3 days. And that was, of course, the idea in Christian theology that Jesus contends that his ministry is where he is a living temple that people can work with. People don't understand why the Romans were so vigorously destroying the second temple of the Hebrews. The Romans understood why, because literally the temple, when it was constructed first, the Temple of Solomon, and then constructed again in this much greater and grander Temple of Herod, which was spent 40 some years to be built, and it was only in the last 6 years of its existence that it was completed. So it only sat there for 6 years completed until the Romans took a broke it up and set fire to the limestone, and then melted all the gold that was all on the walls and all in the Holy of Holies at the center of the temple, and took all of that back to Rome with the menorahs and all that, which is in, I think, Trajan's column. You can see all the tribute and the things that happened. The so back in that time, um, the reason why the Romans destroyed it is that the temple literally was, and the Holy of Holies was considered where God dwelled on this world. if you literally dwelling on this world. I mean, the way the sun, they said the limestone was so white and the gold so brilliant at dawn or at sunset that it was hard to even look at the temple. It lay in the kind of deserty, semi-arid air that has dust and stuff that it would glow with the whiteness and the goldenness. And it was people were thinking, wow, it feels like God's really in that house of the Lord. And the Romans understood that and they utterly destroyed it, which was their way of basically utterly destroying Judaism. And they spent 2 years destroying it, the legions of Rome, which they'd never done before like that, except for Carthage. This was even worse than Carthage, what they did to Jerusalem. So it's interesting, at least from the way the Christians look at it, and Jesus being noted to have made his famous prophecy, that he was talking about, and it falls into an interesting cycle that I've spoken on before. There was Saint Malachi, who was famous for in the 1200s of writing the papal succession unto doomsday. And I've written a best-selling book about that, and I'm updating it again, but I'm not going to publish the update until we get closer to the anniversary of Jesus' passion and crucifixion and resurrection, which is 2033 AD. Because that is a transitional period between what his contemporary, Giacchino di Fiore, a Calabrian monk, had written a very interesting book where he had a vision that the good news of Judeo-Christian teachings to the world was actually started by that actually consumes three 2,000-year long ages, 20 centuries apiece. And he named them after the Holy Trinity. The first age was the age of the Father, the Father God, what people outside of Judaism call the Old Testament. Then that age, with Jesus's crucifixion and resurrection, uh, that started a transition between the two ages. Ages don't happen just at noon or at midnight, and then you're in the new year. It's like they overlap. And there seems to be an overlap in Di Fiore's prophecy that in this case, that prophecy of Jesus, I found out, was very well known across the early Christian communities. So well known that when it looked like the Romans were advancing on Judea to fight the Hebrew rebellion, uh, by then all of the Christians that live in Jerusalem had left. Just the last holdouts were there. And most of them then went into Jordan to establish the first church at Pella. And so then what happened is the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. But before that, the idea is that Christ was in this transit. His mission had been to reveal himself as the living temple, where a temple of stone housing God was not needed anymore, that the Son inside the temple, the body of Jesus, was now the new holy temple. Now, so what then happened is that it's just like twilight. You're in between night and day at dawn, and that the light of that new idea began to grow. It took several decades until the very symbol of the first age of the Father was utterly destroyed in 70 AD. And so if you look at the book of Revelation and occupy more of your time less on the symbolic prophecies, but more on his longer part of the book of Revelation, St. John's book of Revelation, which is looking at his message to the first churches, the first 7 churches of Christendom. And I feel that none of the prophecies of what you might call the Old or New Testament really have anything to do with experiences past 70 AD. I think they were all fulfilled symbolically, kind of finishing the touches that the many people who called themselves Daniel, there's about 23 because each scripture of Daniel is different. Now, maybe that's because memory had changed it all, but there's at least 23 different styles of writing that shows that there were 23 scholars that wrote the book of Daniel. And of course, Book of Daniel has a very interesting calendrical thing it does where it looks, and people were expecting around the time of the first century AD, as we call it, that the Messiah was coming. Emmanuel was coming, and that's why it was such a hotbed during that period of time. And Jesus was even fulfilling the Pon Froms. He wasn't the only one to do that, though. That they were anybody who thought they were that Messiah had to do certain things that would give them a chance to actually be that Messiah. And Jesus was doing exactly the same thing. I used to joke that around this time in Judaic history, it was a good, if you were a carnival barker, it was good to make a lot of money giving people piles of pond fronds every weekend or something, or on the Sabbath. And also it would be good to be a donkey renter. So you get the best donkey because you never know who's behind is sitting on that donkey may be Emmanuel, you know? So the name of the Jewish Messiah coming back. And by the way, a Messiah it means a very similar thing that it means with Dalai Lama of the Tibetans. A Messiah is a king, a temporal king, and a religious king of the line of David. And so it means they're both. And that is a similar thing with the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama is a political leader of the country of Tibet, but he's also the leader of, of the Tibetan spiritual leader of the Tibetan people. Similarly, a lot of people are misunderstanding in the minority Shia um, uh, grouping in Islam, which is about only 200 million people who are Shia Muslims, in a sea of a couple billion Sunni Muslims. Um, People are getting it wrong that Ayatollah, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who was murdered by Israeli bombs, and with most of the family in Tehran, that started the 28 February war, ran with Israel and America. Uh, he he was only the number two highest cleric in Shia in the Shia sect. The highest is still alive. He's got to be pushing 100 now. And I have a bit of a relationship with him. Uh, he back in the 90s, when back in the early 2000s, when Iraq was being occupied in Operation Iraqi Freedom, I used to get messages from his secretaries online thanking me for sending my HopeProphecy.com reports. Kind of, they were called, the series was called Between Iraq and a Hard Place. Um, and they would thank me, and then I realized that Ali Sistani is kind of follows a similar path that I follow. They call it in Muslim words a quietude, which means meditation. So he rarely speaks with this. And when he speaks, everybody in the Shia world listens. And so anyway, he uh, he that Ayatollah in Iraq, he's the Pope of the Shia. And I just heard last week that Ayatollah Khamenei's son, who's now the new Ayatollah, the supreme leader of Iran, Mojtaba Khomeini, he had a phone conversation, a secured phone conversation with Ayatollah Sistani in southern Iraq, where he sought advice from Sistani, being truly the leader of the Shia people. And he said, what am I to do about the situation with the fatwa against no nuclear weapons that my father held. And Sistani, I understood, said very simply, the fatwa died with your father. So now it's a different situation. And the fatwa is not something stuck in stone. It is if things change and the situation changes, then we Muslims must adapt to the change. And the change being simply is that Israel is now a nuclear power, even though they hide the fact, and the Americans are a nuclear power, and Trump stupidly is very open talking about annihilating an entire civilization of Iran, letting it glow in the dark. Uh, really, not very good things to be saying as a leader like he is with nuclear weapons. But the situation is that, long story short, basically Sistani told him that he supported that fatwa is now gone. Now we need deterrence from these mad people who want to destroy us. And the possibility of nuclear weapons being used now is more high than ever because, as Paul and I were talking before the show, Trump has exhausted. He's gotten most of the stocks of strategic, well, not strategic, but of conventional weapons, missiles. He's emptying out. And it looks like he is going to, he with Israel or Israel dragging them in, and it could be in a few days from now, Israel's kind of saying we're going it alone. Um, and so when you have no more weapons to fight conventionally, the uh, a man with front lobal dementia who's kind of losing it might say, well, then I have to use a tactical nuke to have the same effect. I just drop one on them, and the Iranians will then do what I told them to do. So the possibility of that is very high now, and so. So basically, Sistani said to the Iranians and to Muqtada is that now a nuclear weapon needs to be a deterrent against that mass murder of the Islamic believers and of the Shia world. And uh, and of course, because it's still haram, it's still blasphemous. But it is a necessary evil that we have the weapon that could deter our enemies from Trump or um, Netanyahu from launching them upon Iran and the Shia world. So, um, so what that means is that now Iran does not need to have a nuclear weapon. This thing that is, as with any great wars that change everything, like this war has, new realities come into view. And one is that countries do not have to have nuclear weapons, but they can be threshold nations, which means they can have all the tools ready and all the fissionable material turned into nuclear material for weapons. But and they can make a point saying we have this. Maybe they even have the ability to launch a test to show that they can make them. And I think Iran will do that if they're going to this. There will be a test. They will be saying one day, okay, at this moment in Iranian time, tomorrow, watch your seismic activity. You're going to see a 6 point, 7 point earthquake in this part of a certain Iranian desert or under a certain Iranian mountain. And it will exactly happen on that day. And when it happens, as people knew about North Korea, as people knew about China and others, you will know that we are now a nuclear power. And if they're also smart like Koreans, they'll do a couple more tests to show that they can manufacture them quickly. And then, so you can be either hit. This is what I think may happen. The Israelis or Trump will drop some token bomb on Iran, maybe Tehran, to make his point. And then within days or weeks, Iran will put together 11 nuclear warheads, which they can out of the material they have rarefied. And Israel's the size of New Jersey with a GDP of Los Angeles, California. And, Iran is a vast country. And even though the Israelis probably do have 30 thermonuclear warheads, as well as your common atom bomb, Hiroshima size, about 200 of those. If they were to drop all those on Iran, they still wouldn't hit all the missile systems. And Iran has the plan to launch in one day 1,000 hypersonic missiles across the length and breadth of Israel and take Israel out conventionally in one day. And one of the simplest ways they can do it is, since the 12-day war, the Haifa refineries have never been brought back to full accounting, full energy. They're kind of a wounded system. And it's real dicey how they can keep it going by a thread. And Ashdod is the other place where they could have a backup system. But if Iran launched just missiles into Ashdod and Haifa and utterly destroyed the strategic reserves in the oil tanks and the refineries, utterly destroy them, Israel's lights would go out, the power would go off. It's so the Zionists are really taking this to the insane edge that could very well see a situation where people have to leave Israel because there's no power anymore. The water doesn't run anymore. The all the systems that make civilization work there will be down, and they will not get repaired for years. So it could very well be that there would be then a second diaspora, which I think is highly likely in these coming times. Um, and as what I understand from Torah Judaism, which I study, and Torah prophecies, and I have contacts with Torah rabbis, is that um, the Zionists forced their way back to the Holy Land. They were not invited. They did not come peacefully. They came to rape and pillage and throw people out of their houses and commit all kinds of sins against humanity that are no much different from what Nazi Germany did to Jews. And they are now doing it to Semitic people, cousin brothers and sisters of Abraham, which you'll notice a racist Zionist will always do this. They will call Palestinians anti-Semites. They're anti-Semites for not supporting Israel. And that is an attempt to deny the link to Abraham that they have. They are your cousin brothers and sisters, Semites. They are Semites. So how can they be anti-Semite? But how can you pretend you're not anti-Semite by not even calling them Semites? It's just something I don't hear enough where people make those throw out those things, and I say, well, then you're an anti-Semite. Killing over 1 million of these people is an act of Holocaust and anti-Semitism. So anyway, so I'm going to jump to a few of these things. So I was talking earlier about, so this next set of Hogue prophecy reports is going to be looking at the shofar when it's been silenced, and how since the concept of Zionism was created, and in the stages in which it finally got to Israel in large numbers, and then as it advanced, many of the steps that have led it towards being more violent and racist and fascist, basically, are often following those rare events when 1 year or 24 months of 2 years, the shofars cannot be blown, and Satan then judges the sinners and prosecutes the sinners for 12 months or 24 months. And what I noticed is it's taken me so long to finish this because it's such a symphonic, complicated, amazing story with all these moving parts. I had to go back and put some things into it in the beginning where um, I said, some of you are going to ask me in your notes and your letters why I didn't talk about the Palestinian events like the March of Return, and why I talked about the second Intifada, but not the first. And I'll say, I never expected this, but they're not there. I'm only going to talk about those things that the shofars were silent of happening, those outrages when the shofar was silent, those sins. And so I'm surprised to find out these two events. The first one is when all for a year or so, Palestinians went out into the fields before the Israeli guns and snipers and would mostly demonstrate peacefully before them, just before the firing line. And that what happened then was about 200 over the time, it was 224 men, women, and children, Palestinians who were killed by Israeli snipers, and another 9,000 plus that were wounded, and in such ways that were really meant not to kill them, but to create them as burdens for the Israeli community by crippling them, by shooting a man's knees so he couldn't walk, by making sure they shot the small of the back so that they paralyzed him or her. And so they'd be carried out and then be a burden upon their families and the state. So there was a policy of the snipers to maim in ways, and sometimes they killed straight on. But that's why there's so many thousands. So that all happened when the shofars were blown, when that happened. So anyway, those are anomalies in this situation. So what I'm going to do is just walk through some of these and get to the beginning of my rough draft, well, my final draft here, and kind of look at some of these, how it happens. Okay, let's see. Yeah, what I did is in the opening was one last thing about the Roman situation. When people say that Palestine didn't exist being called Palestine, I found out that in the third Jewish War of Rebellion, which was the Bar Kokhba revolt, that ended in 135 Common Era CE. Um, in a few years before that war ended, which was the one that really caused what was left of anybody left in the Holy Land leaving, Rome erased the name of the former province of Judea. That was their last Romanization. In a drive to wipe out all remaining Judaic identity, because they'd already burned in 70 AD, they'd already burned the temple. Renaming it Judea for this complete Romanization, Judea became the province of Syria Palestina. So that was done, and so if anybody says to you that it's never been called Palestine, yeah, it was called Palestine almost 2,000 years ago. They started calling it Palestine again, and Palus is predates even Abraham. So it's one of the oldest names you'll find in the Holy Land that has been at the beginning. So now I started off the thing with looking at the the Zionist movement, how originally they even had in its original naming they call it, let's see, they called it, uh, yeah, Yaretz Yisrael, and excuse me for butchering that, but so it was going to be the Agency of Greater Israel was the original name that the group that basically were going to try to get Jews to go and populate Palestine and create a Jewish nation there. And that started at the turn of the last century, in 19th to the 20th century. And it only started to grow with more people coming, sort of like going to the Wild East rather than the West Americans going to the Wild West. First when the Ottoman Empire was there, it was more difficult to allow Jewish people from Europe to come there. But once World War One happened and Ottoman Empire disappeared as a casualty of that war, it was now becoming a protectorate of the British Empire. So that actually made it easier for the Jewish Agency to get more people into Israel. Of course, later on, after World War, the tragedies of the Holocaust and World War II's ending, that of course, because of the 9,000 well, 9,000 Jews in Europe, 9 million Jews in Europe, 3 million survived the Holocaust. And a lot of them were from Russia, and a lot of them were communists and atheists who wanted now to be in a Jewish, socialist Jewish state, because that was also a big part of Zionism. Um, See, Zionism is kind of until later in with the shofars blowing, not blowing when it happened, there was this new movement, I think, in the 70s, mid 70s, when the shofar was silent, called religious Zionism. And it was kind of a culture war and actually Netanyahu and the Likud party have stayed in power because the religious Zionists, which are people like Schmoltrich and Ben-Gvir, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who, one is his financial minister and Ben-Gvir is his security minister. They're religious versions of what Netanyahu is, which is a non-practicing atheist Jew. I mean, he goes through the motions as a politician, but in his heart, he probably believes what a lot of people kind of openly, innocently said, where they said, "There's no God, but he gave us the land," which sounds like a punchline. But these people really meant it. How can no God that doesn't exist give you the land? So, so anyway, so it was called first the agency, Jewish Agency for Greater Israel. So that was already the concept. What is Greater Israel? It is, if you look at the Mogen David flag, there are two blue lines. You see the Star of David in the white field in the center of the field with the two blue lines with white on both sides of the stripes. Those blue lines stand for two rivers that are the borders given to God to Abraham, the uh, the, the the root source of Arabs and Jews. Um, and he these the so the land in between from east to west of those areas are the bordered by, in the east, the Euphrates River up against Mesopotamia, Iraq, and to the west, the Nile. That land up to the east bank of the Nile is all then, according to the Old Testament, given to um, the seed of Abraham. Now, in the earlier part meetings of God with Abraham about this, um, he didn't act before he had a Jewish heir, but his first heir was already in his teens, and that was Ishmael. Isaac had not been born yet. It was the early ways that God gave the message to him was that all of your seed shall live in this greater Israel. which could be argued is that the Arabs, being cousin brothers, should have also been able to live there. In fact, they already do, except for that little area of Israel. Most of these areas that are in between those major borders of rivers um, are populated by Arabs. So so anyway, so the the first set of dates that I listed were in the 1920s. The Sabbath coming on Friday, 18th September 2025, and on the Friday then later of 14th September 2028, and then Friday, October 2029. And then there were some blowing horns after that, and then there was a double tap of two in a row on the Sabbath Jewish New Year's that lasted 24 months, starting in 11th September 1931 and 30th September 1932. And of course, that would mean somewhere in 1933 would be the end of the blowing of the horns being silenced. Now, if you notice these numbers, any of you who are historians or read history, are you noticing some interesting numbers here? Well, I'll start you off on it. 1925 is when two things happen that are significant to the future threat of Judaism and Jewish people around the world. It is when Adolf Hitler was released from Landesberg prison the year before and published volume one of his two-volume Mein Kampf, which ends up being one of the most read books in the 20th century, especially during his time. Almost every German read it, and that's a lot of tens of millions of Germans. Um, in that book, he lays out his very clear. I've read it, and it's very clearly lays out quite prophetically accurate that what he was going to do, that he was going to make a greater Germany and would use military force to do it. And he would mostly, after he placated first, sat on the French and defeated them so that his back was secure, then he would launch into the east, into Eastern Europe, all the way to the Urals and expand all the way to take the Soviet Union, which he considered a Jewish uh, conspiracy of Bolshevik Judaism. And so, as subhumans, the Russians, and he wasn't the first European leader to, even to this day, who still think Russians are dumb, subhuman people, and yet they keep every every invasion that the Western Europeans commit upon Russia since 1242 AD has utterly been destroyed by the Russians, who are far superior and seem smarter about defending their land than the idiots who invade it. So anyway, so 2025, the shofars fall silent and Hitler is able to publish his book, which will eventually lay out his whole concept of Jews being. In fact, there's in one part where he talks about it would have been better if, rather than the hundreds of thousands of Germans that were gassed, he was gassed, by the way, at the end of the war. He was blinded for a while from it at the end of the war. And so he said it would have been better if we gassed the Jews. And so he was already commenting on that future nightmare that would happen in the Holocaust with gas chambers. So that was all written then. So basically, Satan's saying in this, in my view, is look out. Here comes retribution. Here comes perhaps a danger for the Jewish people who, especially under Zionism, who don't actually, at the heart of the Zionism, don't actually believe in God and worship God, and Yahweh. So, in a biblical sense, that's going to get you in some trouble. Um, so, um, what happened September 28th? The 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 shofars fell silent again, and when they did, just moving around here a bit. Let's see. The in the middle of that silent period of the shofar was the stock market crash in 1929. And it was the thing that Hitler needed to gain power in Germany. If it wasn't for the stock market crashing, because basically Germany, the other trajectory of 1925 is this was the year that after he went to prison for his Munich putsch, he became famous because the trial went on for months, and he actually would stand there haranguing the witness stand for hours. And it was all printed in German newspapers, and even the judge was sympathetic to his cause and gave him a light sentence. And that's where he was only going to get 9 months. I think he even got released before that. And in most of those 9 months, he wrote he started writing Mein Kampf. And he had a rethinking of his ideas, which was very dangerous for the future of the Jews and other Gentile people. All 60 million of us got killed in World War II, Jews and Gentiles. He started to see that he wasn't going to use revolution to take over Germany. He was going to be a legal politician and do it through the democratic process and use the democratic process to erase the democratic process and become the Fuhrer. Well, he started that process in 1925. So 25, he creates his his Bible, his Nazi Bible, and then he pursues it as the Nazi Messiah. So that happened when the shofar was not there to bless that Jewish year for a lot of the consequences that would come. Then 1929 is the stock market crash that he needed because Germany was actually recovering from the inflationary periods of the early 1920s. And Hitler was really upset because saying, I need an economic crash to get people out of their comfort zones so we can have another vote and overtake this government by voting. And it came, the stock market crash. The shofars let Satan free, and Satan, if you wish to look at it that metaphorical way, made his play, and the play being on the pride of people who created a speculative economy and not an economy based on real values. Just speculating on the physical economy. Unfortunately, it is a sin that is coming to a crystallization uh, in the coming double tap that's coming in a month and 5 days. Then Paul and I were talking at the beginning before we got on the show, how significant a economic crash is coming in the 24 months that are beginning in September of this year. Now, so what happens in 1932 when the shofar is silent? Well, after the one that made the stock market happen in July 1932, the Nazi Party wins 37.4% of the vote during the German national parliamentary elections, making the German National Socialist Party the largest party in the Reichstag, the German parliament. This compelled Hindenburg, against his desire, because he didn't like Hitler at all, he's old school Prussian general, to pick him as his chancellor. Hindenburg then dies. And then then Hitler replaces him as president of Germany. He finally, in 34, he gets the brown shirts. He takes out the brown shirts, so now he has the army behind him. And then when the ram horn, the shofar, was silent again on 27th September 1935, Hitler, now the anti-Semitic Aryan Messiah, was now der Führer, the leader of Germany. In that same year, he rejected the Versailles Treaty and declared Germany open for rearmament, and thus setting in motion his war plans of conquest. That in 4 years, um, school, that in 4 years would start in World War II in September 1939. So, and then also in 1939, during the Silent Shofar, that is when he also made German youth conscript and build his armies. You know, they only had 100,000 men that the Versailles Treaty allowed Germany to have as only 100,000 man army. After in 1935, when he dumped the Versailles Treaty, he started national subscription draft and rearmament in preparation for his war of conquest. So you see a pattern here. The pattern is you have latently in the latent racism Zionism, its opposite, which is coming to threaten Jewish existence, as well as many other mischiefs that are here in this. So that's just an example of some of the things that are happening. I'll just move a little farther. Um, in World War II, there's a lot of important things that make sense because the Holocaust was one of the things that would come from to Jews from that. And so there was shofars were silent on the Sabbath on sundown of Friday, 11th September 1942. Now, um, the what's significant in that is that in the shofars that happened before in the last wave before this one I'm looking at is where Hitler couldn't lose. The Japanese couldn't lose. And then 1942 was a turning point for both of them. I mean, the shofars were silent 3 months earlier. Before the shofars were silent, a prophecy of Isoroku Yamamoto, the chief admiral of the Japanese fleet, he was the one that guided the Japanese fleet into a successful attack on Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December, 1941. He told what had been a military attaché in the United States and had traveled all across the United States. He spoke fluent English. And he told the government, they said, well, the United States is not a bunch of, as popularly or believed in Japan at that time, that they're a bunch of dissolute, immoral people, weak people. No, I know these people. They are industrious. We build 120,000 cars a year. They build 250,000 cars a year, which was big in those days. And so their ability to manufacture is so much bigger than ours that we literally have only 6 months. If we can knock them out in 6 months before their military power can happen, if we can sink all their carriers and have the Pacific Ocean as ours with their superiority, if we can do all these very hard things to do in 6 months, we have a chance to then take Pearl Harbor, take Hawaii, and have all this air superiority, and then say, okay, we're ready to stop this war. Do you want to stop this war? And we'll negotiate an ending. So, uh, in those 6 months, Japan did some remarkable things. They took all the islands that we'd have to take back from them. They took the Philippine colony that the United States had. They So it was coming now to June 1942, which was just a few months before the shofars went silent, which means the consequences of the Battle of Midway, which happened on the 2nd of June, 1942, would really hit home. And that was because what Yamamoto said is, can you, I mean, he would say, if we don't win in 6 months, then the tide will turn against us and we will lose this war in 1942. So what happened is the four most powerful elite carriers of the Japanese Navy were going to try to take the westernmost inhabitable island of the Hawaiian chain, which had airstrips on it, seize the airstrips, and set up a situation that the American Navy would come out of Pearl Harbor with its carriers and grapple with the four elite carriers of the main Japanese fleet. And what happened on the 2nd of June, literally, was in that one day, Japan lost the initiative. The tide turned in one day. Now, it fought on for several more years, but there was no way Japan was going to win after that happened. In one day, suddenly, out of the blue, all that morning, the Americans were throwing planes at them, and they were just missing the carriers. And then, in one point, within 5, 6 minutes, two masses of dive bombers found the Japanese Navy out in the vast Central Pacific, and they set afire the Kaga, the Akagi, and the Soryu, and the people on the Hiryu, which had been hidden under a squall line of rain showers, so the dive bombers didn't see them. They had the terrible vision to see three great columns of smoke and fire rising over the horizon. And it's like, oh my God, those are the carriers. So the one carrier that was left managed to launch a couple attacks on the Yorktown and mortally wounded. It was later torpedoed by the Japanese. So of the three carriers, they only took out one. But later that evening before sundown, the Hiryu was also discovered and blown up. So thousands of sailors, hundreds of irreplaceable, really the greatest carrier pilots at that time that were around, because the Japanese were really ahead of everybody else in carrier warfare. They were all gone. So 1942 is when there's a chance the Americans have a chance to equality, and Battle of Guadalcanal happened, and Cape Esperance, and some of these other things happened. But after 42, they never could move forward. It was all defensive fighting, all the way bloody back to 1945. Now, what happened in 11th September 1942 in the shofar silence was that Germany tried its second major offensive in its war with Russia, the Soviet Union. It had in it had survived the Battle of Moscow, which was the greatest battle in history. 7 million people were in it. 2.5 million were killed, wounded, and captured in a 6-month period. And Germany lost 650,000 casualties, which meant it could not resume army groups north, center, and south on a 1,000-mile front, so that the Russians were thinned out. They only had enough soldiers now to go in the south, Army Group South, to plunge into the steppes, into the oil fields near Baku, and one of the main areas that they had to fight at in the Volga was the city, this long 30-mile city, industrial city named after Joseph Stalin, the head of the dictator of Soviet Union. And so the Soviet, there was I'll just read it for you. It said the shofars fell silent on the Sabbath sundown on Friday, 11th September 1942, just as Japan 3 months earlier had seen the tide turn permanently in America's failure. In late August, the German Sixth Army had penetrated the outskirts of the ruined and flaming city of Stalingrad. A week prior to this, the German Luftwaffe, under Hitler's orders, bombed the city named after Stalin in what was the greatest bombing attack in the Eastern Front, destroying 90% of the city's buildings and killing 40,000 civilians because Stalin ordered them not to leave the city. The blunder of bombing Stalingrad meant the Sixth Army was advancing into a chaos of ruins and streets blockaded by falling rubble, falling buildings, granting great advantages to the Soviet 67th Army that was ordered to defend Stalingrad. It's like what happened earlier in Rostov when the Germans did not bomb Rostov, and they took it in 3 days. It's a real big mistake people make. If you turn a city into ruins, it's a perfect battle. It's a fort. The chaos of the ruins makes it a great fortress. So anyway, So the 67th Army was amassed inside Stalingrad and put under command of Lieutenant General Vasily Chuikov on Friday, where the shofars went silent on 11 September 1942. And that on that day was just when the German Sixth Army began entering the smoldering Stalingrad suburbs of wooden the wooden houses they expected to see were now burned a week earlier by the German bombing, and now they were literally walking through the macabre scene of a forest of lonely chimney trees, all left standing. And when they finally got into the stone and brick mortar part of the city, they ended up in a 30-mile battle, bogged down in Stalingrad along the Volga, and basically most of the 300,000 German soldiers engaged, starting on that day, would never come home, never come out of there. No shofar horns of blessing on that Sabbath eve on 11 September 1942, but a thunderous roar of guns and death from the Japanese for the Japanese and Germans. Add to that no quarter given to 6 million European Jews decided at Wannsee, because also in 1942, under the shofar silence, the plans of Wannsee were arranged, the final solution to the Germans, to the Jewish question, where using a high industrial mechanism to industrialize mass murder. You know, these nasty things come up when the shofar is not blown. Um, so I take it all through the war, all through the beginning of Israel, all through the shofar being silent, um, in significant days, even unusual days, which I'll just talk about a little bit, like, um, let's see, yeah, like the Suez Canal, the second Arab-Israeli war, that happened when the shofar was silent. And that's where the British monarchy tried one last time to show that it was a superpower, but they couldn't beat Anwar Sadat and the Egyptians who had taken the Suez Canal. And the Israelis took the Sinai, but they were ordered by the American president to go back into Israel. So, but they learned from that they could take the Sinai in a few days, which was very important, given that what came later. Um, Another time when the shofar was silent, go figure, on Friday, 28th September 1962, it was just a few weeks before the 13th day Cuban Missile Crisis. Nearly began a thermonuclear Armageddon between the United States and the Soviet Union. So that's a big one. It's also a big one because in one of the shofar sendings, I think it was, there was also a fateful decision made by the Zionist state to have France do some things for it. The price being that they helped them build a nuclear reactor at Dimona, so they could begin to become a rogue nuclear power. So that also happened on a shofar. Um, Let's see. Uh, yeah, things like this would happen. Starting now the difficulties with the Palestinians fighting back under Yasser Arafat were starting to happen. And when the shofar was not blown on 12th September 1969, the the Cairo Accord was reached on 2nd November 1969. It was a decision that Nasser helped negotiate, which basically made the PLO and Yasser Arafat a state within state in southern Lebanon, which began all the Lebanon-Israeli wars. So that's another thing. I'm going to jump. The Let's see here. Yeah. Yeah, the PLO abducting um, Jewish wrestlers in the Munich Olympics. That happened on a silent shofar.
Can I just interrupt, John?
Sure.
So going back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, all right, let's just dive into this. because something popped in my head here.
Okay.
It's important to understand that Rosh Hashanah coinciding with the Sabbath, we don't blow the shofar. That doesn't allow us to nullify the prosecutor. Okay. Then shortly after that, there is Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement.
Yeah.
But shortly after that is Sukkot.
Yeah.
So the Cuban Missile Crisis took place the 16th to the 28th of October of
29th, actually.
All right, 29th. Okay. So
I know because I was born on it was my 29th birthday. No,
I was just reading.
my sixth, my seventh birthday.
Okay. All right. So 16 to the 29th. So October of 1962.
Yeah.
Rosh Hashanah, September 28th. All right. And Rosh Hashanah outside of Israel is 2 days. So it was September 28th at sundown all the way to nightfall on the 30th of 1962.
Yeah.
Yom Kippur, October 7th.
Yeah.
Sunset, and then October 8th at nightfall.
Right.
So Sukkot starts October 12th and ends the 19th. And then Simchas Torah is happening between October 19th to the 21st. I believe what is happening there is outside of Israel, it's 2 days. Inside of Israel, it's 1 day. So sometimes holidays last 2 days. Some holidays are 2 days outside of Israel.
Right.
All right. The reason being is you didn't know when the official approved time of sundown and what the lunar cycle was before the calendar that was established through, I think it was Maimonides. But either way.
Well, and then sometimes if you have a 2-day situation, sometimes the shofar technically fell silent on the second day. Well, on rare occasions, there was one of those where on the dusk of the second day of Rosh Hashanah, it was Friday, the Sabbath.
Right.
Yeah.
So the point here I'm making is that Sukkot and Simchas Torah coincides with the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
All right. Now, Kabbalistically, Jews have an opportunity that if you didn't do everything perfect on, Rosh Hashanah, in terms of, explaining to God, your failures and how you're going to correct yourself, you have that Day of Atonement to do it again. And then there's this countdown. You have an extra chance with Sukkot. And then you have this extra chance with right before Simchas Torah. I just find it as fascinating that you're making the connection with these events, with the holidays, with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this is what happened with October 7th. Because October 7th, again, Rosh Hashanah. So I'm talking about 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Rosh Hashanah coincided with a on the Sabbath. It wasn't blown, I believe. I think it was. I think that's the case. But the point here is that October 7th was Simchas Torah. So I think you are hitting right on the target and making a connection between Kennedy's administration, nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
What's starting to emerge here?
Yeah, that Kennedy might have been also killed by because he wanted to stop Israel from having a nuclear reactor.
Yeah. So okay. I just wanted to bring that up. That for the audience. It's important to understand that there are these other holidays that rapidly happen right after
Yes.
Rosh Hashanah that can accelerate these kinds of events.
Yeah. Well, and also when a very interesting thing about the shofar that went silent in 1972, for that entire year, Anwar Sadat, who had taken at the end of the previous shofar, it ended a few days before it ended. Nasser had a heart attack, the Egyptian president. So he was taken out. But what happened was it brought the successful president of Egypt that followed him, Anwar Sadat, who then, during the shofar silences of 1972, during that whole time after 8th September 1972, he, for a whole 12 months, he started preparing a surprise attack that would completely surprise the Bar-Lev line, which the Israelis were now on since 1967, and the War of Attrition, which also played in the shofars. Its climatic year was 1969, of the 3.5 years that, basically the airspace over Sinai Desert, which was now occupied by Israel, was seeing constant air raids and air combat between the Israelis and the Egyptians. And then the Egyptians were building this whole net of missile umbrella so that they could invade into the area, and the Jewish divisions would then be exposed without air superiority, because if they went under the SAM missiles that the Soviets were giving the Egyptians, it would be very difficult. So, the Yom Kippur War. So I did get a little into the other celebrations, talking about what happened then. So it's like, okay, by the way, it was Friday on the Sabbath on Rosh Hashanah, 8 September 1972, when no shofars would be blown in blessing for the birth of the Jewish New Year. Satan, the prosecutor, would have his way judging Israel for the next 12 months. Over the Jewish calendrical year, President Nasser's successor, Anwar Sadat, successfully kept secret his preparations of Egyptian armed forces while under the Jewish year of shofar silences. They were ready to spring their massive attack up and down their side of the Suez Canal not long after the shofar silence had ended on Wednesday, 26 September 1973. The Israeli forces in their forts were celebrating Rosh Hashanah before that, and were next preparing to celebrate Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, or the first 2 days of it. And so the holiest holiday of the Jewish year, steeling themselves to observe a 25-hour fast with extended prayers. On Yom Kippur, Saturday, 6 October 1973, on the first day of the Atonement fast, at 2 p.m., an Egyptian artillery barrage from one end of the other of the west bank of the Suez Canal roared into action, with over 200 Egyptian fighter bombers pummeling the Israeli forts, catching Israeli defense forces completely by surprise. Next came columns of Egyptian soldiers crossing the canal on quickly constructed float bridges, while on the Israeli side, Egyptian teams with hoses were already busy pumping floods of Suez Canal water to spray away the steep Israeli defensive sand berms, to let heavy tanks and personnel carriers break out of the barriers, spreading out into battle formations heading east. Sadat's surprise attack from Egypt was synchronized down to the same 2 p.m. hour, the moment that hundreds of Syrian tanks amassed and to take back the Golan Heights roared into action. The Israelis eventually won Yom Kippur War, 6/25 October 1973, the fourth Arab-Israeli war since 1948. But in its early stages, it became the closest Israel had come to losing a war. And it was also the closest any Israeli prime minister had come, then being Golda Meir, to order up a nuclear weapon strike to obliterate the advancing Egyptian Third Army. She openly talked about that. Yeah, she was asked, yeah, yes, we were going to use them. We were going to use one. They had the jets ready. They had them all loaded up, because they wanted to take out the Third Army of Egypt, which was making a lot of advances, overwhelming Sharon's panzers and stuff. So it was so that's so I
Do
so
you
this is
think,
just scraping the surface of this. There's so much more going on here. And
do you,
what also I do in these, the first seven articles are about the shofars, and they take it all the way up to the final silent shofar that matters in the changes of ages, which I spoke of earlier, which is even in 2070, which will be the 2000-year anniversary of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD by the Romans, which could, in De Fiore's concept of the three ages, the ages of the Father, the age of the Son, which started in 30 AD and then came to full fruition. The twilight was into full day of the new era by 2070. Oh no, by 70 AD. So 2000 years later, the age of the Son will begin to end. Is this idea of him, the temple now being a living temple, is going to drop temples and living messiahs entirely if De Fiore's prophecy is correct. That the third and final age, which will see the end of the Son's age starting just a few years from now, in the anniversary of Easter, 17th April 2033, um, will then enter a period that will end up in 2070, seeing the age of the Son outshined by the new 20th century, 2000-year long age of the Holy Spirit, where no temples are required, human or made of stone, but that there will be, in that period of 2000 years, an ability for the human race to have a direct contact with the divine. No middlemen, no religions. And so I thought that's a good place to end it. And then what I follow up with are a number of very interesting themes that are kind of augment and go beyond that. And one, of course, is the world begins to see the demon, and it's this whole idea where the world is awakening to Zionism as it's being practiced as being something equal to Nazism, and that it's now the world's changing. Now, in fact, just today or just not long ago, there was an important trial in Britain where the courts came in favor of that, saying that you cannot suppress anyone who calls it as an opinion Zionism as being synonymous with Nazism. Now that wouldn't have happened before. People would be silenced by anybody because it was like you couldn't criticize Israel for its faults. And some of Israel's faults really are right up there with some of the worst totalitarian regimes, racist, genocidal things. It's all hatching out now. So that article looks at how the world is starting to see Israel's problem and are not supporting it anymore, which hopefully will be a good thing to help Israel drop all of that. Although it could go the way of Nazi Germany too. Which unfortunately, with any fascist form of fascism, whether it's Ukrainian Nazism, whether it's German Nazism, or the new Rome of Mussolini and his fascism, even used the term fascist from the symbol of the staves with the axes in it, which is a symbol of Rome, the Roman Senate, but it's also a symbol of fascism. It was on the flags, the tricolors of Italy when Mussolini had his fascist state. Um, and fascist Imperial Japan, and all of these. And now what's happening is Israel is now becoming the new fascist repeat. History repeats itself. How ironic it is that Israel, that the Jewish people that have created a Jewish state, And by the way, they're in a minority of Jews. I'm part Jewish myself, so I can tell you that the majority of Jews around the world do not support what Zionist Israel is doing. They think it's an abomination, and they used to get thrown out of colleges for it a year or two ago. Now that's turning around. The other thing that's very important in the last several chapters, and this is a thing that really, if you haven't subscribed to become a Hogue Prophecy Report receiver, this is the time to do it, because the last several articles are looking at a bill that is being that was written by Benjamin Netanyahu, a clause in the NDAA financial, how are you going to pay for the next year in the vast military industrial complex. And what it's basically doing is this clause will literally make Israel seamlessly a part of the United States military industrial complex and its armed forces. And it will not have the oversight that if this thing passes, you won't know as the people of this nation what's going on with your military, because it'll be illegal to talk about it. We've got what the CIA will tell you, the most dangerous country, the one that is stealing more secrets from the United States than any other and selling them, is the Israeli state. Now that Israeli state, literally by law, if this thing passes in the Senate, they don't have to steal it. They can just walk in and grab it, whatever secrets we have, and they can do whatever they want with them. It literally is the culmination of this process where AIPAC and other Jewish organizations have been slowly, steadily doing a creeping coup d'etat on the United States government by buying it off. This president has been bought off by Miriam Adelson and her husband at the tone of $250 million. And in these articles, I show to what extent how all these key senators and congressmen and women are all in the pocket financially, except for maybe 8 people in our Congress and Senate. Everybody else is bought and sold by the Zionist state, a genocidal state who has tried so many years and so many decades to use America as its big dumb brother, to stumble and fight its wars and get bloodied and killed for it. I mean, the war to take over Iraq was a war in 2003 and lasted till 2011. That was to destroy Iraq for Israel. I write about it in these articles. Ariel Sharon was the main man back then that was persuading George W. Bush to basically have thousands of Americans be killed and tens of thousands crippled to fight a war Israel couldn't fight. But its big dumb ally will fight it. And so all those kids were not fighting for us. They were not fighting even this big myth that Saddam Hussein helped Al Qaeda in 9/11. Absolute lie. And I can't forget how many families in documentaries, when they're mourning the 7,000 American dead, which some of their sons and daughters would sit there and pathetically say, well, he died for a good reason, because Saddam was with bin Laden and Al Qaeda. Bullshit. Utter bullshit. Never happened. So Israel is literally now one small step away from literally running the United States of America and making it its weapon, its nuclear weapon, above and beyond its own weapons, because it has over years bought the United States leadership and power centers and And if this thing is passed, that's why it's good to read this. You'll hear about the bill. The bill, I'm telling all of my readers to write their or call in their senators and congressmen and women and prevent this thing from happening. Because let's see. So I'm gonna there was what I have is three conversations, and they all have a very interesting throwaway in three articles. It's transcripts of three conversations. The first was with Larry Wilkerson and who was he with? Larry. Uh, just a second here. And Glenn Deason, really good sources of mine from the alternative media. They kind of put a broader brush overview on what it would give Israel. And then I jumped into and introduced another set in two parts, which is a must person to follow, one of the greatest journalists of his younger generation, Max Blumenthal. And go check him out. Go check out his website, his which is the Gray Zone, Grayzone. He and his wife also, Anya Parampils, also great journalist, and um, they are must people listen to. He's a Gen Zer, I think. And anyway, so so I have that in two parts because I also look at the other thing that's not talked about much, and that is that there are a lot of people in the Knesset that if they don't get what they want from America playing along, that if they go down, they're going to nuke us. They're going to nuke Russia. They're going to nuke China. They're going to nuke Europe. And they have the means. So, in the first part of the 12th and final article, I show how the Jericho 2 missiles and some of the smaller ones actually have the reach to reach the eastern seaboard of the United States and Washington, as well as targets in Europe, all across China, and targets in southern Russia. And I remember this parliamentarian was just raving crazy. He was saying, oh, you Russians, you're not going to help us? Well, we can nuke you too. And I mean, these are the MPs in the Knesset who are Zionists. And so, the whole Samson option is not just pulling down the region, but it's also got a reach. If they go down, they may just bomb even the hand that fed them. So, so anyway, the act is called the United States Israel Futures Act. Remember that. And also, uh, anyway, if you read this, you'll find out about it. But anyway, I just wanted to read in the second. There's a great summation that Max Blumenthal makes. And I'll read it to you. Um, so, so, okay, let me find a good spot to launch. Okay. Yeah, here it is. This is Dennis Kucinich. He used to be he used to be the congressman from Ohio. He ran independent in the last election, presidential election period. And he's when I consider people that I would consider he's a constitutional activist. He knows the Constitution like every one of us should know it as well as he does, because literally I think the argument is right to say if you don't know your constitutional rights and responsibilities as a citizen, does that really make you a full-blown citizen in the United States? I don't think so, because what you have now is that I mean, the people have to be literate in their own rights. Otherwise, you'll be run roughshod, even by a foreign nation. I mean, when I grew up in a more politically literate period of time in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and if Israel tried to pull this thing off back then, they would be sat down. Like, what are you talking about? You're a foreign nation. We we invoke the congressmen invoke an oath to defend this nation from both enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, somebody who wants to take over your country and run it like a parasite in your brain, and run your body and make you think and do things that are not in your good interests and your best interests. Um, this is about to happen. They may not. It got passed in the Congress, the House of Representatives, and now it's been thrown back to the Senate. It's possible, as Kucinich muses, that a lot of times something as volatile as this is probably not going to be really voted on until after the midterm elections, when they kind of know what the nature of Congress is going to be. So, so it's possible it'll be delayed, or they'll sneak it through before the elections. But it's back at the Senate now. And of course, it may go back and forth, because there will be people that might manage to get this clause. Because basically, the thing is, take this clause, which used to be 224, and then because every time they change it and go to another round, it becomes a new number. It's now 219. And I think now it's it's a 4-digit number for the same thing. This is all bureaucratic stuff, but so I'm going to read a passage from this towards the end. Um, I'll start with Max Blumenthal. And so Israel is one of the most repressive countries on the planet. He's a Jew, by the way, if some of you don't notice. It presides over a population of occupied people who comprise a majority between the river and the sea. That means there are more Palestinians living there than Jews. And it is testing its weapons on the population and then exporting them, declaring them field tested. That includes its surveillance technical stuff. Israel's Unit 8200 has strongly infiltrated Silicon Valley with hundreds and hundreds of Unit 8200 veterans. It's even infiltrated U.S. media through the figure of Barak Ravid of Axios. The infiltration is so deep, but would set um, this would take Israeli penetration to a whole new standard. And the question is, under an administration like that of Trump's administration, which is targeting the left and its political enemies with unprecedented persecution, would this allow the U.S. government to use that Israel surveillance tech, death tech, against domestic political perceived enemies? Dennis Kucinich says, I think it opens up the door for all that, because we're not just integrating offensive capacities here, but we're importing values. And when you look at the fact that some of the ICE authorities were trained by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and actually, there's been local police who have gone to Israel for that training. And if we start to merge these technologies, let's take, for example, drones, okay? The drones could become involved in domestic policy, armed drones. We already see ICE becoming as murderous a force on American streets, and I would say, yeah, ICE behaves with the people they're running after like Israeli police hunt and kill Palestinians. And Kucinich then adds, and if you start to move towards drone policing, because the drones are ubiquitous in Gaza and the West Bank, and they're becoming so in Lebanon, who says that with these are our partner, if these are our partners, that won't happen here? Yes, it's going to happen here. We lose control over some basic principles and basic and constitutional rights. And constitutional principles here, Max, are not just the individual articles that we know about, but there's some specific about the role of a commander-in-chief being able to have jurisdiction over the armed forces in times of war. But those members of the armed services take an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. Israel doesn't have a constitution. They have basic laws. They're not going to defend the interests of the United States of America. This is really an effort to smuggle in interests that would usurp the American way of life. I mean, we have our problems here for sure, and I don't like our policies in the Middle East. I've spent a career in Congress challenging them almost on a daily basis. However, this proposal in Section 219, the clause that Netanyahu wants in it, puts the U.S. and Israel government together in a common offensive effort. It promotes weapons endurance, intelligence depth, increased AI target capacity. The U.S. provides cover for Israel and what they do. There's diplomatic deterrence there. And the U.S., you use the word earlier, entangled with Israeli policy. Their enemies become our enemies, even more so, and America becomes more of a target. Yeah, we become targets of Israel's enemies too. There is nothing about this that is right. I don't know if you remember. I mean, when I was growing up, and you were a little bit younger, I was talking to Max, I was looking at a comic book, and the comic book had a cartoon that said, "Find 10 things wrong in this picture." You could find 100 things, 1,000 things wrong with this picture, this 219, section 219. Max Blumenthal now speaks. Yeah, well, one other thing would be usurping congressional authority on war powers. Dennis Kucinich says, totally. Because right now, the Congress, by focusing on war powers, the War Powers Act alone has not been successful. Let's face it, you want to stop a war, cut off funding, period. That's the way you stop wars. The Supreme Court. Now I'm going to go to Max will then say, he says, um, if Israel, this is Dennis Kucinich, if Israel is inside the government and Israel becomes a partner in the United States Department of War now, we will never see the end of war, and Congress will not even have the ability to be able to retrieve the policies because they will have once this passes, the idea of oversight becomes archaic because everything's about to be opaque. Okay? DARPA, opaque, right? Cyber warfare, opaque. Intelligence, opaque. Strategic development, opaque. So this is a strategic entrapment more than anything. And I just come to the end of it where Max says, let's see, hold on. Yeah. Anyway, I'll save the climax for those who read it, but that gives you a taste of I think these articles are probably the most important articles that I've ever labored on in my long writing career, and trying to warn people of imminent dangers that literally will affect every one of you listening and watching this show. It'll change your lives in very negative ways, in very totalitarian ways. And so this is a time to write your congressman man or woman, write your senator, and say no to this. Because basically, if these people vote in a foreign country to run our military and its military um, and CIA and all that, that's treason. That means you are letting a foreign nation come in and be a domestic enemy because it's going to think about what it wants, not what you want. And it's going to have your leadership in its pocket. And this is the greatest threat that the United States has ever faced in its 250 years of existence. So, I know this is a really intense set of articles, but, world's on fire. Put it out. You have to know about these things. So, you know, I know I'm sometimes hard to read because it takes guts to face some things that are not right with our society right now. And and don't think that if you keep your head in the sand that somebody else is going to fix it for you. Yeah, yeah, somebody's going to fix it. But that person, that country doesn't care about you at all. So, um,
We have a question.
okay,
Our favorite listener, Don, is on the line.
not done again.
Ah, go ahead, John.
Thanks. The one thing I found interesting that you mentioned was the French role in giving nuclear technology to Israel, which would have been, is that 1950s you were mentioning?
It happened in it was late 50s. And then actually the program, Dimona, I think, was built by the early 60s. And ironically, the French were also involved with Saddam Hussein's nuclear arms race. The Osirak research reactor, the Israelis actually bombed it with jets in 1981. And it's interesting because there's an anagram of Nostradamus talking about those of Geneva will continue to talk and talk, and then they'll never come to any agreement because of Rapaz. Rapaz is an anagram for Osirak. And so it is, the Geneva is also the second home of the United Nations. Now it's possible it could have been for Geneva when it was the precursor to the United Nations. I don't rule that out. But Rapaz is kind of an interesting thing because in an anagram it spells out Osirak, which was the code for the French reactor they were building for Saddam Hussein, whom, by the way, as Scott Ritter pointed out, who was the head of the people who were hunting all the weapons of mass destruction, he was far closer to getting a nuclear weapon than anybody dreamed of that he was. He was maybe months away, and then he took the bait to attack Kuwait. But I remember when he did that, it just blurted out of me. I just come back from living in India for years, and my mother comes by and says, "Hey, guess what? Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait." And the first thing that came out of my mouth is, "That's too soon. That's too soon." So he jumped the gun, thank goodness, because if he hadn't, those Scuds that were hitting Israel would have had nuclear weapons on them, and the Israelis would have retorted and destroyed Iraq. So, you know, anyway,
My question to you too, like just following this line of thought, because I'm interested in the military. And I say this because we look at like these people in politics, political leaders, and they have very little, in my opinion, authority to change or reverse course the corruption within these governments. So I'm looking at the military, and I always looking at people like, and let's look at the French. You would have had de Gaulle, who was a military, who was a recognized military leader that was revered by the public. And my question, what was his position on giving access of nuclear tech to the Israelis? Was he for or against it?
I'm just thinking I will start by another famous prophecy of Nostradamus. It's the only time he used it like a name. He said, "A man surnamed de Gaulle will lead France for 3 times." He led them as the head of the Free French during World War II. He was the provisional head of the French provisional government in 1946. And then coming to this issue, At the end of the 1950s, there was the Algerian crisis, the fall of Algeria. It ended up seeing the Fifth Republic deposed and reestablished as a Sixth Republic, and then de Gaulle became president of the French Republic, and he was there until for I think the bulk of the 1960s. I think he died um, at the end of the 1960s. So that would have had him in the window of time, early and later, in when Israel was creating bombs. But here's the thing: Israel didn't use France, except for just helping to establish at the beginning their nuclear program. But what the Israelis did was to, you know, people who are alike attract each other. A Zionist state that's into ethno-supremacism seeks out a new ally in South Africa, the white government of South Africa, who are also ethno-supremacists, who had repressed the Black African majority. They actually got together, and most of the work that helped Israel and the South Africans, they also had a nuclear weapons program. Israel was able to test its bombs in the Kalahari Desert and also off the Durban coast in the Indian Ocean. Um, and they also shared the technology they stole from the United States and the things that they also learned on their own. And so, as Golda Meir is the only leader of Israel that actually openly talked about the fact that she was going to use atomic weapons on the Third Egyptian Army in the Yom Kippur War. So I don't know what de Gaulle's policies on that was, but I think de Gaulle's main um, point of view was, for a time there, he left NATO as an active, France as an active ally in NATO, but it still remained in the NATO offices as an overseer and part. So politically it was still there, but the French forces were not and would not be engaged unless they decided to be engaged if the Soviet Union advanced across the Fulda Gap and started this whole mess that way. So the idea of keeping French sovereignty was very big in his, actually his policy was called non, N-O-N, no, his no prophecy, no on this and no on that, and it was whatever Europe wanted to do. So, but beyond that, I don't know. Obviously, there's not, I don't think, let's see, he was gone by 1981 when Osirak was happening. So maybe it was clandestine.
And maybe John, what I'm finding is there's a couple people like de Gaulle. I think again, I just was trying to find out because I have to research a little bit better. My understanding that he was rejected it because there was at that point, I think it was Malloy who was the prime minister of France, and there was another person who was only in there for a short period of time. In fact, I think the person who was in there when the deal was being negotiated, his party was collapsing, and there was a rush to get the deal done. And I think de Gaulle, who was also active, I think politically, was rejecting everything about the whole deal.
What year? What year was that?
It was 1960. Shit. Hold on 1 second. Sorry.
That was a bad year.
It was 1957, I think it was.
1957?
Yeah, 1957.
I'm not sure if de Gaulle was president in 1957. I mean, he's very close to when the collapse of the government. That sounds right. But
right, yeah, that's right.
The thing to ask is when did the Fifth Republic become the Sixth Republic under de Gaulle? I mean, I'm going to look at my own grok here and see if it comes up.
And I say, because I think I forgot about this, what you're mentioning, which I find fascinating, is the French role in this. And here's another interesting fact that I think this is why I said when you brought up Max Blumenthal. Well,
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hold on that thought. Hold on that thought. We'll keep on this last thought. Charles de Gaulle was elected president on December 21st, 1958. So he wasn't president.
Right, but he would have been obviously involved in the discussions, and he would have been someone who understood the mechanisms of the government.
Not if you're not president, if you're just a candidate, he wasn't, you got to remember what happened. He became the president because of, and I'm now going to the de Gaulle thing to see what they say about the issues that brought him into being president, which I'm scrolling to right now. Because he kind of retired from politics after 1946, and
this is where I was going with this. The other important leader at the time who seemed to went silent. It was also Eisenhower. Same thing. Mm-hmm. Eisenhower was one who gave that speech, but at the same time, he sort of removed himself. After the JFK assassination because if you remember, there's phone calls where JFK is advising him on here's what's going on with the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Eisenhower just sort of went underground, so to speak. He sort of removed himself, even though he warned about the serious consequences.
Well, first off, Eisenhower wasn't involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was Jack Kennedy.
No. I'm saying there were phone calls where he's just informing Eisenhower.
Eisenhower after he's retired?
After he's retired, yeah.
Okay. Are you talking, maybe you're talking about Mendes France. But here's the thing. He was not in politics in 1957. He only came back in 1958, a year later. He said, de Gaulle suddenly dropped out of sight and returned to his home in Colombey. And that was back then. And then he made a renewed attempt to transform the political scene in 1947 in the Rassemblement du Peuple Français. Okay, that was going on. And then there was a whole issue in the 40s about the rising of Viet Minh. And he's basically, is the independence of Morocco and Tunisia was arranged by Mendes France. I think he was the prime minister of the Fifth Republic, and proclaimed in March 1956. Meanwhile, Algeria, some 350,000 French troops were fighting 150,000 combatants of Algerian liberation movement. Anyway, between 1946 and 1958, the Fourth Republic had 24 separate ministries. Okay, so we're talking about a Fourth Republic. And then the collapse of the Fourth Republic. Now we'll get into it. The Fourth Republic was racked with political instability, failures in Indochina, and the Algerian question. And so I'm just a speed reading it here through here. Okay, here's where de Gaulle, let's see, there was a Committee of Civil and Army Public Security was created under a presidency of General Jacques Massu, a Gaullist sympathizer, General Raoul Salan, and Commander-in-Chief of Algeria. So, okay, so at the 19th of May on 1958, de Gaulle had a press conference. Journalists okay, and he kind of said, as a journalist expressed concerns, some who feared he would violate civil liberties. De Gaulle retorted, have I ever done that? On the contrary, I have reestablished them, and when they had disappeared, who honestly believes that at age 67, I would start a career as a dictator? So, okay, the crisis deepened. I'm speeding through here on May 29th. President, okay. So the return to power happened in November election. They had an election. Basically, the Fourth Republic was taken down and replaced by the Fifth Republic in September of 1958, and then he returned to power in the Fifth Republic in the November 1958 election. So Charles de Gaulle and his supporters initially, okay, so he wasn't politically active until I don't think there's a connection.
No, I'm saying I think there. No, what I'm saying, I think you might be missing my point. I think what I'm saying is that these military leaders have connections, obviously, to the military establishment, which is the one institution that really doesn't change in terms of, if you have to say what might be the most trusted institution that citizens look towards, especially now, you might find that there's a high level of confidence in the military versus politicians.
I'm sorry, man. That is just not the reality. Militaries change a lot.
Not at that time. I think you're going to find de Gaulle was highly.
What are you talking about? There was a the Fifth Republic replaced the
No,
Fourth
but I'm
Republic.
saying if
It
you
was a
look
very
at,
politically volatile time.
I'm actually agreeing with you. If you look at the person who
And
was
look at the
prior
way
to that,
they were debating against what the French army was being defeated at Dien Bien Phu. The Viet Minh handed their rear end back to them, and they lost French Indochina. If you understand the French military forces, there was a lot of chaos and instability in the French forces. And basically, the French Vietnam was as big a disaster for the military then, and then the Americans stepped right in and did an even bigger one. So no, I I kindly disagree with you on this.
fine. Well, let me just throw my last thing on Max Blumenthal. The
Oh
one
yeah,
thing.
sorry, yes, good Max.
Yeah. So Max, he's the son of Sidney Blumenthal. Is that correct?
Yeah,
So
another great journalist.
right. So how do you think he reconciles Sidney Blumenthal's coaching of Hillary Clinton during the Benghazi files?
Well, Max is his own man. And Max is not a
What
guy
do you
not to
think?
disagree respectfully with his father and
You know,
point out what
do
was wrong with that. I mean, Max is quite a you know, I've been following him for years. It's amazing.
So, like, same thing. Like, so this is the irony here is Max who's coaching Hillary on essentially overthrowing Gaddafi, especially to make her appear to be more of a neocon hawk-like, politician that would resonate better with the public at that time to make her a more a more looked like a more credentialed sort of politician. So that's his father. I've just questioned: is he ever gone and gone against his father in any?
Oh yeah, he goes against anybody he doesn't agree with, and respectfully, but he does. And he's a hard nails kind of reporter, and he was having to kind of straighten up Mario Narfall a few days ago, who's the guy that's in UAE. He was actually really growing into his work, but he got quoted wrong. And Max is truth first. If you don't love truth, you're going to have a hard time with Mr. Max. And I think his dad respects that because that was a dumb move from his dad because Hillary is an idiot.
But you have to admit the irony here that he might have been responsible even for Hillary Clinton saying, we came, we saw, he died.
I don't think so. That sounds like a classic Hillary Clinton Scorpio,
no,
but Scorpio 12th house move.
It was the culmination.
No, Max's father wouldn't do that. I don't think. That sounds like her. That sounds like you should look at her chart. It's very similar to mine, so I kind of understand it because she's a 12th house Scorpio, like I am. And so I did write a book about her, what really happened to Hillary Rodham Clinton. I did a whole thing on her, what happened in her election against Bush, and it so upset the folks that I almost got banned from Amazon because Bezos is a bit is gaga over Hillary, and I exposed the fact that Hillary Clinton's book, What Really Happened, was that they were actually changing the reviews to give her good reviews, and because her reviews were so terrible that they fixed the system, and I showed it, and then the irony is that they fixed the system not thinking that they have a program in there where they say what are the most read reviews. And so here's all these, oh, her doo-doo doesn't stink. She's wonderful. Everything's great. And then it says, and here's the ones that are most commented on. And of course, there were all the people saying, you keep saying you want to have me give you a review, and I did read her book. Why do you keep bumping me off the list? And so the people, hundreds of thousands of people were reading those. So they tried to erase the one-off negatives, but her book was universally negated by the people who read it. And and I exposed it, and then one day I had my real nightmarish experience with having not even a human being attacking me and threatening me, but a thing that's not even alive. A machine is saying, "We know what you're doing, and if you don't stop it right away, we'll take you right off all the pages, and all your books will go dark." And they didn't tell me what I did. Um, and there was this bot didn't like the way my book cover design was, and it had a right to do it because I was actually critiquing her book. So I said, what really happened, Hillary Rodham Clinton, was the way I designed it, and somehow because it's just a soulless, dumb bot, it it thought that I was trying to piggyback on her cover. And no, it wasn't that. And so, I mean, I think they lifted the ban. I think if you go, you might still be able to buy the book. But at one point, they didn't even give me a way to talk to anybody as part of the terrorism of this. And then suddenly I saw my books go blank. And so, you have a system set up to scare people, to abuse their First Amendment rights, and threaten them with their free speech to be blacked out. So, I've been shadow banned from my Facebook page as well when I exposed the massacres, showed the videos, exposed the massacres that were happening in 2014 when Ukraine's Nazi problem became the power, the government by U.S. aid, U.S. What's its name? Barack Obama's administration uh, actually supported the Maidan coup that overthrew the democratically elected Dmitry Yanukovych. Putin and some Western leaders in February of 2014 had actually found a way to lower the Maidan's potential for violence, and that Yanukovych was going to go for another election either in that year or the following year. Everything was set up. The Russians gave the Ukrainians 15 billion. The European leaders gave them another 15 billion, 30 billion million to help the country. And then what happened was, um, then Victoria Nuland stepped in and basically aided and abetted the right sector, Protli sector, which is one of the darkest of the Ukrainian Nazi groups. It's the one, if you see the flag that has a red and black flag, like the blue and yellow Ukraine flag, which is the blue sky and the grain fields. The red and black flag is the Ukrainian Nazi version of it, which says our pure blood goes into the dark soil of Ukraine, fighting for Ukraine. So it's very fascistic way of looking at it rather than blue sky and the beautiful harvest. The Ukrainian bicolor flag is one of my favorite flags, very pretty, but they're not. So anyway, I had like 20,000 people on there, and then they did it something to where they couldn't connect with me and I couldn't connect with them. So yeah, it's I know I've had a taste of what this clause may do to all of us with the Israelis. So,
We're at the end of the show, John. So
okay.
you would explain to the audience how they can sign up for your periodicals and sign up for your readings.
Yeah, this more than ever, this is a real call to you, to all of you. Uh, you're not going to get this kind of information in your mainstream press. It's geared to keep you in the dark and make you think you're knowing what's going on. And so I'm a member of the alternative media, and my sources in my articles, I'm a gateway to many, many people in the alternative media. And I would love to see you subscribe either for the monthly $5 or $10 if you wish, but $5 a month, or you can drop $60 for an entire year. And the links are here on this page, and it's a time. We who try to tell you what's really happening in the world are being beset at all sides. And we don't have hundreds of millions of dollars of Miss Adelson and Bezos and all these people to keep our machine going. We sink or swim by the contributions that you give to this work. And so uh, don't wait for somebody else to do it. If you've seen some of the things I've read today, if you resonate with them, if you feel moved by what I was writing about, um, become a subscriber for $5 a month, or do it one time for 60 or a little more for a year. And then you will have access not just to my work, but it'll be a doorway to a whole other um, network of people who are trying to tell you what's really going on in the world. Because it's never been a bigger monster of people saying, "Oh, as CNN's infamously stated in an ad back in the mid 1990s when Turner handed it over to some corporate barons. They had an ad where it says, it's not always, it's not important, not so important that you know what's going on in the world. What's important is you know someone who does. Big Brother knows. I mean, I smelled that one way back before. Now the whole mainstream media is all like that. There was a day when CNN was really worth watching, and Fox and all of them. Yeah, just not like.
There used to be just to go off on a tangent really quick here, but there used to be a restaurant in New York. It may still be around, but I ate there years ago. Ted Turner's restaurant, and it was the first time I had a bison burger. And
That's right. He had bison
pretty,
burgers.
yeah, because he had his own, he had his own ranch, and
Yeah.
he raised bison. But interior, it gave it that almost rustic, Western, South Dakota kind of feel, But that was the first time I had a bison burger. It was really
How did
good.
it taste?
It was great. It was
Yeah, I mean, it's much healthier meat than
no, it was great.
cattle.
It was the first time I had a bison burger at Ted's restaurant. Yeah.
You can ask anything you want at Ted's Bison Front. Bison Bite.
No, I don't know if it's still there, but I mean I ate there years ago, but it was good.
All we know is that he's no longer around. Although I wish he had
He
done his third movie on the
he
Civil
died this
War.
year, right? He died
Hmm?
this year?
Hmm?
He died this year, didn't he?
Oh, I think it was earlier. I don't know.
Oh, I thought he died this year.
Yeah, let's find out.
Let's see.
He had Alzheimer's for a long time.
Ted Turner. No, he was I liked his just kind of like that southern. Oh, I didn't. Oh, he went to Brown University and was expelled.
That shows intelligence.
Nice, right, nice. Okay, so he died at age 87, May 6th of this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I thought he'd gone long ago. I know he had Alzheimer's for a long time, so he kind of faded. I think it's one of the reasons why they didn't do the third movie in this Civil War trilogy, which would have been The Wilderness or Appomattox, would end up with the end of the Civil War. And um, yes.
I didn't know he was expelled. Right.
That's that adds to my
Yeah,
brownie points for him.
yeah. That and having a bison ranch. I think that'd be
Yeah.
cool to have a bison
You can
ranch.
probably see if it's still there. Maybe it still says Ted Turner's Bison Burger.
Maybe. I don't know. I'd have to look.
I'll check for you. Even though I'm a vegetarian.
All right, so I put in the description for the ones that are listening the link to John's website. So please click the link, sign up for his periodicals and his readings.
Yep, I do readings. You see the same background, the Hogue office. And you know, the readings can be 2 hours, and just you and me looking at your astrology, looking through the tarot, doing an unusual form of the Celtic cross that I do that shifts as I go. I'll start a Celtic cross and then it'll tell me pull this card out and do a Celtic cross on this, pull this card out and do a Celtic cross on that. I don't think anybody else does it like that. I may be wrong. But and then it goes really deep, and it's always fun. It's not some big terrible thing to have a reading with me.
All right, breaking news. The name of the restaurant was Ted's Montana Grill.
Oh,
According to the website, the New York restaurant is permanently closed.
oh
So
well, there's a lot of
I
bisons that
can't have a bison anymore in New
a lot
York.
of bisons are happy about that. But
But it looks like it's franchise, or there's multiple around the country. So
oh, it was a chain.
yeah, it's a chain.
That would make
Ted's
sense.
Montana Grill locations.
Yeah,
Colorado, there's quite a few in Colorado, Georgia, Connecticut,
oh, so they're not in New York, but they're still everywhere else.
yeah, Florida, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Montana,
Wow.
North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia.
Sounds like the red meat states are enjoying him. The
It
blue
was
states
it
have
was
let
a
it go.
it was a great burger. I remember it. But what was cool is they had paintings of kind of that out west, look with
Like Frederick Remington,
yeah,
Russell, all those great cowboy painters.
yeah.
I love those
Just the
paintings.
feel of the restaurant was pretty cool. All right, well,
See,
thank
I come from cowboy stock, by the way. My people come from North Dakota, Mandan, and Michigan, and they were probably in the Civil War. They were probably riding with Custer's Michigan Brigade
Well, I was
because I
born
have a Civil War sword in the family from that.
I was born and
We
raised
were Union.
yeah, born and raised in Michigan, but I never viewed myself as a cowboy.
Well, the Cowboys went west. I mean, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, Dutch Hogue, he used to do rodeos. He was a real cowboy, and he then ended up raising horses in a ranch he had in Montana. And then Hollywood started calling, saying after the great robbery in the silent films in the 19 teens, they were calling out for any real cowboys to train Tom Mix and all the other actors to be real cowboys. And he moved the family down to LA, and he ended up doing that. And he ended up meeting Wyatt Earp, and he said he didn't like him at all. I never met him, but he was a character.
That's hilarious. Okay,
He got
well,
drunk one time in World War One, and he was tired of being a supply guy and not going to the front. So he got really drunk, climbed into a World War One tank, and started driving towards the front. They had to go get him. Yeah. And I guess it's in the family. My father was in the Army Air Corps, just missed fighting. If it hadn't been an atomic bomb, he probably would have been air base in Kyushu under Japanese fire. But in Operation Typhoon, but the atomic bomb happened and ended that. But he was proud of the fact that he became a sergeant in the Army Air Corps 3 times and got busted 3 times. And I'll just end it with this one final Bud Hogue moment, is that he had this 19th century Japanese naval pistol. It was quite beautiful. And there was this guy, obviously a corrupt officer, that was checking what people were bringing on they're going home, at the end of the war. and end of service. And so he says, "Oh, you can't take that pistol. I'll have to keep that pistol." And he says, "You're not going to get this pistol." And he says, "Yes, I will. You give it to me." And my father held his arm out and dropped it in Tokyo Bay. Kerplunk. "Why are you doing that?" He says, "Hey, why are you getting so upset? You've done your job, sir." Which was, he didn't get to, get money for that. Must be a politician now.
Must be fun.
6 feet under.
All right, so I'm going to just remind the audience again that the link is in the description, so please click the link to go to John's website.
Yep.
So,
I'll
John,
immediately, as soon as you do, I'll write you back. And then if you want a reading, we'll do that. And if you want to, get this one I'm releasing, I'm going to be releasing it in about 3 days. So become a member and read probably one of the most interesting ones I've ever come out through this channel.
there's always little interesting tidbits that come out of these shows. So,
Yeah. Okay.
saying goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye to everybody.
All right, good night. Good night for all the ones that were listening, and I will be replaying these on all the channels tomorrow. Everyone have a good night.